Welcome back to the Ready Room Podcast. I am your host, Josh, and today we answer the question, or ask the question, really, what comes next for America? Hope you guys enjoy. All right, guys. First things first. July was our best podcast month yet of 2021, and you guys really liked Chase Fisher, and that's really good to hear because he will be back for another episode in the future. And we really appreciate you guys. The support has been fantastic. Feedback is always welcome as well. And if you like the podcast and want to support it, the best thing you can do right now is to review or rate the podcast on whatever site you're listening on. If you're actually watching on YouTube as opposed to listening, don't forget to like and subscribe, because that will actually help push us up in the algorithm and help us reach more people. And you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at TBR Gunworks, as well as our website, which is pretty basic at the moment, to be honest. So with that stuff out of the way, I hope you're ready for a different kind of episode, slightly darker, unfortunately. I'd like to apologize ahead of time to those listeners and viewers who have told me specifically that they like how we mostly focus on the firearms themselves and not politics. But sadly, this is not an episode that you will be ecstatic about if you are one of those people. However, I do really think it's an important episode and something we should be talking about, despite how uncomfortable it may make you or upset or whatever, okay? I want to talk about what comes next for America, and that includes effects on those of you that live here, but it also includes those of you who, don't live in America. So if you don't live in America, because I know we have people in Europe and the Commonwealth and even Asia who listen to the podcast. So if you don't live in America, don't tune out just yet, because what happens to America affects the entire world. Our economy fuels the world economy. Our government has its greedy little fingers and hands in every aspect of the world's function. And we are looked at as the last bastion of hope for many people around the globe. So first, I need to start out with what I'm talking about. What's the context of what I'm talking about? So I'd like to start off by saying, let's look at the state of our nation, the American nation, in 2021, okay? As it is August 2021 when I'm recording this. From the top down, we have a corrupt president who most likely has severe dementia or Alzheimer's. We have a vice president who is completely corrupt and slept her way through the proverbial food chain. We have a Senate and House full of corrupt representatives that are too afraid of the mob to stand up for the so-called principles, air quotes, that they say they live their lives by. And we have representatives that have absolutely no idea what the real world is like, and they vote accordingly. We have judges who are also too afraid of the hard left mob to give fair trials. We have state governors who have literally murdered thousands of people that walk free with absolutely no consequences for their actions. Rules for thee and not for me, as it's well known. We have unelected officials, aka the alphabet boys, that completely change how this country operates on a day-to-day basis with absolutely no say from the people. Remember, these are unelected officials. These are not elected officials. They're not voted in. They're appointed or just randomly hired off the street. It's not random, you know what I mean, though. These guys actually have a severe effect on how our country operates day to day, and we have no say in who they are. I know that was kind of a long list of problems, and it's not the only list of problems, but it's completely true. If you're not sure about the president, look at literally any of his recent appearances in front of a camera, It is a disaster of gaffes and stumbling through basic sentences, and the vast majority of his sentences make absolutely no sense. It's impossible to follow. If you're not sure what I mean about the governors who murdered thousands of people, look up Cuomo and Whitmer, Governor Cuomo and Governor Whitmer, and you will almost immediately find the murders they're responsible for. Thousands, okay? Thousands. If you don't know what I mean by unelected officials, look at the FBI, who helped stage a kidnapping plot. Look at the IRS for obvious reasons. It's the IRS. Look at the ATF saying what we can and cannot own by simply changing interpretations on a day-to-day basis, despite them not legally being able to change law since they're not part of the legislative branch. None of this is conspiracy theory. Not one thing I have said so far is conspiracy theory. It is literally all cold, hard fact that can't really be disputed. It's just, it is what it is. I'm not giving you, in this section, opinion. I'm giving you a list of facts, okay? And they all look pretty bad. It's actually really, really sad. Despite the lack of serious reporting by the large mainstream news networks, these things happened, right? So a lot of people tend to only focus on the mainstream news networks, and when something doesn't get reported through the mainstream news networks, they say, well, I've never seen anything. I haven't seen that, so it probably didn't happen. Or you're just being a conspiracy theorist. But in fact, that's not, these are all factual things. There's plenty of articles on them by non-mainstream news networks. A lot of alternative media journalists are doing a lot harder work at reporting truth than our so-called, journalists in the mainstream news networks. So I could go on and on for hours about how messed up this country actually has become, despite it still being the only country I would choose to live on in God's green earth. This is still, with all its issues, the only country that I would choose to live in. For now, at least. That's, subject to change, I guess. The country is, like I said, or alluded to earlier, sadly, crumbling before our very eyes. The racial divide hasn't been this bad in decades. The good police officers that swore an oath to protect and enforce the Constitution and protect their communities are quitting in droves, leaving only the officers who will do whatever they're told because they need the paycheck. And that's very sad. I know a lot of good police officers who have recently quit because the nonsense from the other states, the blue states, when it comes to how police operate there, has finally made its way down to our area. And it's either don't do your job at all, or do it illegally and poorly, or quit. And I am actually glad there are still police officers who had the character and integrity to quit rather than to break the law and treat human beings in their communities like garbage, all because they need a paycheck. But unfortunately, that does leave a lot of the police officers who are still in. Not all of them, obviously. I know some are still trying to make a difference. But that does leave a lot of the bad police officers that we don't want. The ones who would just do whatever they're told for their paycheck. They're the ones still there. Not, like I said, not all of them. But the ratio is definitely changing. Our industrial backbone has been completely wiped out, with a vast majority of the jobs moving overseas to countries that we're supposed to vehemently oppose. And I think that's one of the most backwards things that this country has done in recent times is break bread with the enemy that we completely disagree with on a fundamental level and give them the power to control our own infrastructure and our industry. It's mind-numbing. It's mind-numbing. Man. Inflation is through the roof and climbing more and more every day. If you haven't seen that, go look up inflation rates. Go look up at the rise in price of lumber, any industrial supplies. Go look up the rise in price on those basic supplies, not services, just supplies. Inflation is through the roof, and the vast majority of money has been printed in the past 2 years. They are printing because money machine go burr. Okay, and I don't know if you guys ever learned from Weimar Germany, but when you just keep printing money, it doesn't work out so well. I really shouldn't have to tell anybody that. That should be basic common knowledge. But when inflation goes through the roof the way it has recently, you may have the same amount of the currency. You may have just as much money as you did before, but there's less spending power with that money. For example, $20 in 1900 was a whole lot more spending power than $20 now. That's inflation, okay? That's not just, well, the money was worth more because it was different. No, $20 is $20. Now, don't get me wrong, they were backed by gold back in 1900. It wasn't fiat currency. It was actually backed by, gold. But inflation is the change in the ability of spending power. So the decrease of the value of that $1, right? And we are no longer energy independent, causing fuel prices to absolutely skyrocket. And all of you know this. This is not a deniable thing. If you're driving diesel right now like I am, it is rough. I loved 2018 and 2019 because driving my diesel, I was paying $1.85 a gallon for diesel, getting better fuel mileage than the gas trucks that are filling up on gas. That was like $1.65 or $1.60. And now I am paying $3 between $2.95 and $3.10 a gallon on a daily basis. So thanks for that. So after that list of issues with our country that also affect the world, remember, our economy runs the world economy. If our economy collapses overnight, so does the world economy. After all those issues, what makes America so special, right? What makes America so important, right? Because I think that's actually a really important question for this in the context of this conversation. And I think the answer to that is both simple and complicated. Okay, I believe America has been the example. I think throughout history, America has set an example. Despite our faults, which every nation has faults, every country has had faults, every empire has had faults. We have issues. We always have had issues, and we have gotten rid of the vast majority of those issues, but replaced them with new ones, such as the list I just, listed. The American people have saved countless lives. A vast majority of scientific research and medical research is performed in America. We used to have a booming industrial infrastructure that was just unparalleled. We had a military that was nigh unstoppable. I mean, think about that, guys. The American military was the example of what a military should and could be. But at the same time, that same set of examples are looked at by others from a different perspective. They see us as the world police, and they mean that in a negative way. The world police that just can't help from getting involved in everyone else's business. And there is a lot of truth in that statement as well. Physical and cyber spying, thousands of governmental scandals involving almost every other major nation, extremely corrupt government officials, etc. It all adds up to us being just as bad as most other nations. But the people who look to us for hope aren't spoiled Karens and Bubbas and people who look to America for hope are not your average trust fund baby. Often they're completely oppressed subjects with no realistic way of moving forward in life or achieving happiness in life. Their life is survival. That's not everyone who looks to America for hope, but that is a lot of people. Look at a lot of Chinese people who are completely oppressed and subjugated by the Chinese Communist Party. Look at Canadian citizens, which were asking for help from Americans when their government went extremely hard on the lockdowns, including mandatory quarantine in hotels where travelers from out of the country were being forced to stay in these quote-unquote hotels that were mandatory quarantine areas where, what do you call them? Let's just say travelers were barely fed, given no real amenities. They were forced to stay in their rooms, no chance of leaving. And there have been multiple reports of sexual assault in these exact same government facilities. That's dystopian, okay? Look at Hong Kong protests, where citizens were literally begging, and I mean begging, for America to intervene and prevent the Chinese Communist Party from taking over their area and bringing them back into their communist dystopia. Many citizens were, quote unquote, disappeared, finger quotes, disappeared by the CCP after publicly protesting. You're not allowed to protest. You're not allowed to talk bad about the police in China. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that video of the man who was strapped to a chair and given what's fondly referred to as a struggle session, forced to apologize for simply saying he didn't like the police. That's not something you can get away with there. Here, everyone thinks, they think the American government is fascist we're a lot closer to that this year than we were 2 years ago. It's a huge change. But in America, you can cuss out a cop to his face. You do that in China, you die. You disappear. These are not the same thing. Who else? Look at Cuban citizens who have finally been beaten down enough to have nothing left to lose. And they're fighting back against the horrible Cuban government, who are, and these people are generally unarmed, and they're begging for help from America. Guys, I don't know if you know this, but Cuba is not this nice place. Cuba used to be a very nice place before the revolution. Right now, if you go to Cuba, well, maybe not right now. Right now is not a good time for you to go to Cuba. But if you went to Cuba last year and tried to tip a waitress with extra cash, and they found out that she tried to keep that extra cash instead of giving it to the government, instantly thrown in jail. This is not it's not capitalist like people like to think because they have restaurants and Havana, Havana it used to be seen as this spotlight of the nightlife, and it used to be before the government revolution. But look at Cuban immigrants know more about communism and socialism than almost anybody else in America. And if you look at Florida with the voting polls and the rates at which Cuban Americans vote against socialist and communist policies, the reason is they've lived through it. And they've escaped it, and they don't want it. Same thing with Russian immigrants. A lot of times. I mean, some of them are pretty hardcore into what used to be the Soviet Union, but a lot of them who weren't involved in the government, who were actually the oppressed, they resist it as hard as they can. But that was just a small list of people across the world who look to America for help and hope of a brighter future. And we can't even get our own country under control. We can't even take our own country seriously anymore. There is no more unified patriotism. Our government is a sham. Every single policy opinion has this hard dividing line that I don't think we can come back from. I don't think there's a way to find common ground anymore. Because normally I would say we should be looking for common ground And as long as it's not something that as long as it's not something abhorrent, like 40-week abortion, which is, I mean, that's any human being who can say that that's not murder, that's not a line that I'm willing to find common ground on, These are not normal conversations for me. But normally I do try to find common ground on most policies because, it's kind of the right thing to do. But to be honest, I don't think the one side I'm talking about will ever be satisfied. I don't think there's a way to satisfy the left. I don't think the hard left, and I don't mean liberals, I don't mean left libertarians, I mean the hard left. I don't think there's a way to satisfy them because America has been going more left for the past 200 years. Conservatives, as much as I agree with them on a good bit of things, not everything, and I guess I wouldn't say majority anymore. I'm much more libertarian than I used to be. But the right, all they do is say no to the left, and then a couple years later, give in. You look at Republicans running in 2020, and they're running on platforms that were liberal and hard left platforms 10 years ago. America moves left. It's been moving left forever. But these hard leftists in the past, I'd say 5 to 10 years, have drastically changed and shifted into no common ground, no giving in, only further left. The same ones that were saying, calling everyone Nazis are the same ones, fighting for the vaccine passport, which is literally show me your papers so you can leave your own house. Does no one see the irony? I'm sure a lot of people see it, but look at critical race theory. Critical race theory is now being pushed to be taught in schools as early as elementary school. In some states, they've already started working into middle school and high school. I'm sure you can guess those states and the big cities they're involved in. The largest, I think it's teachers union in the country came out and publicly supported teaching critical race theory in schools. This isn't conspiracy theories, guys. This is stuff that happens on a day-to-day that you don't hear about from the mainstream news. And it's really sad because a lot of Americans just don't know what's happening. They have this blind eye turned because it's an uncomfortable topic. They don't want to talk about it. It's uncomfortable. It might change their luxury life, but that life's going to change regardless if you don't get involved. You're letting things happen to you by not getting involved. By ignoring them, you're letting it happen. And it's actually really sad because that's not what America used to be. Let's see. Medical policies. Medical policies are, I don't mean policies that are set in stone. I mean the conversation around policies in the U.S. government involving medical decisions or medical practices. It's a minefield labyrinth of obstacles that is, it's almost impossible to navigate. And to be honest, I don't think we can come back to a unified country ever again. I think we've crossed the line. And, we know that the empires always fall from within. And we have become such a country of excess and surplus and complacency that we are imploding on ourselves. I think that's what's happening right now. And I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. I stay as up to date on what's going on as I can. And it's almost impossible with things happening every single day. And you have to sift through and figure out who's telling the truth. It's hard. But so you've got a good bit of context now. You know what I mean when it comes to America's in the crumbling state that it's in now, and what America used to be, and why America is important, why its involvement in the world is important. What comes next? So whether or not you agree completely, you can't disagree 100%, but whether or not you completely agree with me is one thing. But ignoring the divide that's taking place and has been taking place for well over a decade in this country If ignoring that divide does not change the fact that it exists and it's growing every single day. In my opinion, there are 3 possible paths forward. The first possibility, and the one I hope takes place, genuinely I hope this is the one that takes place, is the potential for a peaceful divorce. Although it would be rather complicated, it is possible for states that agree with the majority of each other's policies to separate from the states that they wholeheartedly disagree with. For this to work, it would require time, an agreement to share a military for defensive reasons, a way of maintaining social programs that are actually uniformly agreed on, such as, firefighting and police. Police were more uniformly agreed on until recently, again, as well. That's a possibility. It's a lot harder because you got to think about trade routes. You would have to think about trade routes. You'd have to think about, if they're 2 separate countries, if you wanted to go from one state that is part of your new union, and I don't mean that to be edgy, I'm just finding common terms that would work for this. If you wanted to drive through a state that is on the opposite union now, what does that look like? What does traveling across a divided country look like? Because it's no longer North and South. Wyoming exists. Texas is where it's at, right next to very different states. North and South Carolina are becoming more different every single day. Virginia and West Virginia. There's no hard line. So what does the country look like? What does travel look like? What does trade look like? I don't know. It's a complicated topic, but I think it's the best option because it's peaceful. I don't want an insane amount of violence. I want peace. And peaceful divorce seems to be the best way. But how long do you wait before you try to go for peaceful divorce? Do you wait until it's too late and there's a grip around your rights in your state from the federal level to where you no longer have the chance? I don't know. I just know that it's getting bad, and I think we really should be looking into these options sooner rather than later. Like I said, it's an extremely complicated process that would take more time than I think most people realize. Because I know a lot of people that are actually advocating for peaceful divorce, but I don't think they realize how much goes into it. If you're going to push for that, you need to be ready to back up how you do it, An idea is one thing, but putting something into effect in actuality is very different. But I still think it's worth it because even a chance of maintaining peace while separating so that people could actually live their lives the way they want, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth looking into. The fact that someone in New York City has a say in how I live my life in South Carolina is absurd. It's completely absurd. In fact, I would go as far as saying the fact that someone in Columbia, South Carolina, has a say in how I live my life in the upstate is also outrageous. They're different worlds. They're completely different worlds. So we don't even live the same life, Someone who lives in the farmland and works on a farm every single day should not have someone who lives in the middle of downtown San Francisco telling them how to live their life or having an effect on how they live their life. It's just not really reasonable. Especially when the cities always have a higher population. So therefore, the country has almost no way of outvoting how they live their own life. It's tough. But that moves us to the second possibility. And the second possibility, in my opinion, is the absolute worst possibility. And it's the continuation of authoritarian governmental overreach until this is no longer a democratic republic at all. Even though an argument could be made that we're only a democratic republic now in name and not actuality. The U.S. federal government has been pushing the envelope on what they can get away with and what they can and can't get away with for a long time now. For example, small example, Joe Biden put into effect a moratorium on evictions, even though the Supreme Court ruled that he could not legally do so without congressional legislation. because that's how the country works, right? You know, the legislative branch makes the laws, not the executive branch. So even though the Supreme Court, one of the three branches in our checks and balances system, said it was completely illegal, he ignored it and did it anyways. The Constitution doesn't matter anymore, people. Like, I want you to look at all the things that are done despite the fact that the Constitution says it's illegal to do these things, and nothing happens. There's no consequences for him to do this right now, yet. Maybe he gets sued, I don't know. But what happens to the people who own rental houses as a way of trying to retire, and they can't evict someone who's not paying? So they just have to pay while they're trying to retire. 60-something-year-old people, 70-something-year-old people trying to live their lives. They have no jobs. This is their retirement plan. Too bad for them, I guess. There are more examples of governmental overreach, but I don't have, enough time to start another list of infringements and overreaches. But if this continues at the rate that it has been in the past decade, the U.S. will look more like China than America from 3 decades ago. Already, America is not the same America from 20, 30 years ago. But if this continues, I think we're going to be closer to modern-day China than previous America. And that's scary. If it keeps happening, we're going to cease being the beacon of hope in the distance, and we will fall into the same rut that all other civilizations fall into when living under an oppressive regime. In the name of safety, people are willing to give away their freedoms. They are persecuting other people who disagree with them, and they're becoming the same extremists that they accused other people of being only a year or two ago. Benjamin Franklin, I know this quote's overused. People hear it all the time, but I don't think you should just, because you hear it, doesn't mean it loses its value. Benjamin Franklin said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." And I think those words ring as true now and today as they did then. People in America are even in favor of censorship, which is an insane showing of their lack of self-awareness. Because if any listener can name one single group of people that was in favor of book burning and censorship, but they were the good guys, you let me know. Because guess what? There is none. Everyone throughout history who has ever been in favor of book burning or censorship have been the bad guys. They've always been evil. The final possibility may seem like the worst, but in fact, I think it has the most unsure outcome of the three. There's no way of telling if this would end good or bad. It'd still be bad from the get-go, but there's no telling if it would end up worse than an oppressive authoritarian regime or what. But the third possibility, in my opinion, is a hot civil war. And a hot civil war would absolutely be terrible, but there are so many potential factors that the outcome is completely uncertain. We are now in a cold civil war. Okay, we are currently in a cold civil war, and we have been for a few years now. We're in a war of ideas with no potential for compromise. This war takes place because one side has a white-knuckle grip on academia, culture, such as movies and other media, social media companies, technology companies. One side of the ideological war has a complete stranglehold on those things. Even though this group of people does not make up the majority of the country as a whole, they are in key positions of power and authority. Okay? They make a difference. They can filter what gets seen. They can filter what ideas get told in colleges. And you can see this. I can't tell you how many parents I have met who sent their kids to college who were hardworking, I don't want to just say conservative because I don't think conservative, the word, works anymore. But traditional kids who would work for money, they would go get a job. They did their homework. They worked really hard. They come out socialist against everything America stood for. Because all they hear the whole time they're at college is one set of ideas. And that's scary. If you have kids, you should be scared of that. Both sides are at a constant war with each other. And this does sometimes come to blows, as you can see when counter-protesters show up to riots and a brawl erupts in the street. And before any of you say, why are you only saying there's two sides? There's three. No, there's not. I'm sorry. To be honest with you, the left makes up one side. Maybe you toss in some libertarian socialists in there, which is just nonsense to me. But the other side is a mixture of everything else. It's big L libertarians. It's small L libertarians. It's conservative people. It's a big group of people. And don't get me wrong, I can't stand Republican representatives as much as the next guy because they're useless. They don't actually do anything. They get elected. They sit on their fat butts for 4 years or however many years they're there. They get elected, they sit there, and they don't do anything. They just say no. Every time there's something to talk about, they just say no. They don't actually do anything. They don't put forward pro-gun bills. They don't put out a bill saying, hey, let's get rid of the NFA. They considered putting the Hearing Protection Act forward a few years ago, and then a shooting happened. They go, oh, no, this is not the time. We'll table this for later. That's cowardice. That's cowardice. So, I don't like Republican representatives as much as the next guy, but do not say there's three sides. Because guess what, libertarians? The hard left is completely against you 100%. Whether you think you're against them or not, they are 100% against you. Sorry. So, brawling in the street happens sometimes. These are individual events and individual incidents that are still an example of the greater ideological struggles going on in the country. If this erupts into a full-blown hot civil war, there's no telling what would happen. If we're being honest, we all know which side the current federal government would ignore and which side they would target. If you don't believe me, or you don't believe that simple, once again, fact, not opinion, look at how many violent rioters across the country get arrested on genuine violent charges immediately released versus how hard they are currently working on arresting every single person that was at the January 6th protest in D.C. Even people who are completely peaceful are being arrested and tried. There's even a 60-something-year-old lady who was just walking around on the property who is being arrested and tried. They arrested the wrong person in Alaska who wasn't even there, broke into her home, tried to arrest her, realized it wasn't the right person. They're going extremely hard against even the people, let's say, even the ones who were actually rioting in D.C., there's still not equality there. You have people that are genuinely burning down cities who get released on a regular basis, sometimes multiple times. One protest, one relatively violent, I say relatively because compared to other conservative protests, it was more violent than usual, which is usually 0% violent. I say conservative protest, by the way. I know there are other things such as the Proud Boys, and that's a different wing. And I'll give you credit, like they definitely tend to brawl with Antifa in the streets. But that's actually more of it's a weird mixture between right and libertarian. They're more of a meme, but I still consider them right. But anyways, it's not equal. They're even the DC police, that means they're only police for DC, are setting up headquarters in 3 other states so they can help use a web of intelligence to prevent this from ever happening again. What you're seeing is nationalization of federal police. That's what you're seeing, which also is something that happened in the 30s and 20s somewhere else. So, something else you can look up that's really easy to look up. But once again, They're arresting old ladies who didn't actually do anything, who were actually peacefully protesting. Meanwhile, arsonists taking part in riots are caught setting fires, arrested, released, only to immediately go start more fires in the same city with no consequences. Okay? So if you don't think the federal government would pick a side, you're wrong. But the scariest part of this possibility is the fact that the level of instability that would be caused by a hot civil war would open America up to attack from its major enemies. Look at the fall of the Roman Empire as an example, because it wasn't just the Gauls, the Franks, and the Celts that toppled Rome. It was the combined effort and issues of dealing with inner instability and outer enemies. Okay? China has openly admitted they want to surpass America as the number one global superpower. And they have also openly admitted to a program involving the infiltration of every major institution in America to both spy and incite instability. And they even said that they have successfully infiltrated every major institution in America. China is not the only enemy, but is in fact the number one external threat to our country as a whole, to be honest. I mean, it's just the number one. A lot of people say Russia, but I don't think you guys understand the technological differences and military differences between us, Russia, and China. It's 3 different countries, okay? We're not all equal superpowers. So that was a lot. Those are the 3 possibilities. I prefer peaceful divorce. But if you want to get involved and you want to try to make a difference in your area, then you need to be focusing on local government and local politics and your local schools. If there are no decent local candidates, then should you just give up? No, you need to run. If you think you can make a difference, there's no good candidates that you agree with, then run. Get involved in the local schools and fight back against any extreme and politicized teachings being forced onto the children. They are children. Let them be children. Keep the politics out of their small minds. Keep the gender nonsense out of their small minds. Keep CRT, critical race theory, out of their small minds. You're breeding insecure and racist children by teaching critical race theory. Start at the local level. Start at the local level and hope that the progress begins to radiate outward and motivates other like-minded individuals to stand up and fight back as well. Once again, I will say I don't think we can make a comeback and turn the country around for more unity. I don't think that's possible, but you might be able to change your area. And you live in your area. It's a coincidence. I know this was a much more dark and much more dry episode, but it is very serious, and these issues really can't be ignored. And I wish I had the ability to reach and motivate more people than I currently can, but I won't be stagnant, and I really hope you guys won't be either, because you shouldn't be stagnant. Complacency kills. This is common knowledge, guys. Complacency kills. Don't get stagnant. Be active. I don't just mean physically. I mean mentally. Locally, be active. But if you enjoyed the episode, and if this hopefully either changed some minds or at least stirred up some thoughts, some critical thinking, not critical theory, just thinking critically about what's going on in the country. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at TBR Gunworks. If you like the podcast, please rate or review it on any of the podcast sites that you currently can. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe to help move us up the algorithm and help us reach more people with logic and reason. Please. Trying to make a difference where I can, but I really want to reach out there and help others as well, if I can. Have a great rest of your week, though. Don't work too hard. Just think. Think about the future. Think about your children. Think about your family. Think about the area. What's going to be best for them? Remember, every gun law is an infringement, and we'll see you next time.